We're all here just for all the fun. Now you're jamming hard, yeah. Hype it up all once again. Hype it up. Now you're jamming hard, yeah. Hype it up all once again. Hype it up. Now you're jamming hard, yeah. Hype it up all once again. Hype it up. Now you're jamming hard, yeah. Hype it up all once again. Hype it up.
Hey guys, I have to break character real quick here to say that if you are not 18 or older, I cannot really recommend that you read this comic. Okay, with that being said, hey everyone, welcome back to the Better Days Fannel. Today we're going to be talking about the hottest ships. I'm talking about Fisk and Lucy. Now some of you out there might be saying, but Rob, aren't they brother and sister? Isn't that wrong? Well, I got news for you. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of sibling love. I mean, think about it. It's kind of the longest lasting relationship in the comic. Everyone's cheating on each other or stabbing each other in the back, but Fisk and Lucy's love is the one thing that maintains itself properly through the entire thing. Okay, I'm done with that bit. That bit is terrible. I had so much time to think about not doing it, but I did it anyway. So I normally spend a lot of time, well, basically all the time, making these structured and scripted videos for Better Days, but today I just kind of wanted to ramble a little bit about something that I've been mulling over in my mind that I'm trying to figure out, piece together, and maybe if we talk about it, or I talk to you and you talk to me in the comments, we can come to a proper conclusion. So Jay Naylor says that he is embarrassed by not just Original Life for whatever reason, but by Better Days, and I'm trying to figure out what specifically is he embarrassed about. Okay, yeah, that could probably be one of the reasons. I mean, the incest plot line takes up a little bit too much time in this comic. As I said earlier, it's like one of the longest lasting character arcs or story arcs or whatever you want to call it in the entire comic, and it really just isn't necessary. But I also think that it is a symptom of what is actually the larger problem with Better Days. And as much as I love Fisk as a character, he is an interesting character. He's also kind of a Gary Stu. There's very few times where Fisk is ever wrong, and he's also got this like wise beyond his years aura going on. He's like having this chess match with an old friend of his dad's. He's got like answers for everything. Even when he does something wrong, even if for the right reason, it's kind of never really looked down on. And I'm also trying to figure out Jay Naylor's sort of political compass here. He definitely seems to be the conservative type, but at the same time, he's got a lot of, I don't know, he's got like anti-religious stuff here. Kinda, not really. One of the big themes of Better Days is like shedding tradition and forging your new path, regardless of what your parents or what any religious institution might think. But then again, at the same time, he's really big on the military and traditional values, except for the fact that there is a ton of cheating in this comic. Everyone cheats on each other at some point, except I think Fisk. I think Fisk is like one of the few characters, and Lucy even like partakes in the cheating. Oh no, Fisk does partake in cheating as well. I just beat the shit out of my door here, my green screen. I don't really think there's one specific thing about this comic that is embarrassing to Jay, as I stated towards the beginning of this whole ramble. I think it's just sort of a myriad of things, and Fisk being a Gary Stu is just kind of one of those things, but I know that Jay Naylor kind of has an affinity for cheating stories. Please do not look too much into Jay Naylor if you are not 18 years or older. I'm breaking character again, but I just want to cover my ass. It seems to be like one of those things that he's really into, and it really seeps itself into Better Days. Not so much in Original Life. Things definitely calmed down in Original Life, and you can tell that he took a lot of the things he learned while telling Better Days, and applied that to his newer stuff. And for that reason, Original Life comes off a little bit better, but I also believe that Better Days still has a lot of great stuff in it, as I've discussed many times. I think the way that the story flows is very, very good. One thing flows into the next and it makes sense, and characters remain consistent. You can understand their logic and their emotions, and because of that, all the emotional highs hit very, very hard. I can't really put like some of the panels in this video because it's well, if you've read the comic, you know why that is, but you guys get the idea. This comic is very consistent, but there are times where it gets a little bit too crazy. It's also one of those things that it's kind of hard to recommend, because while a majority of this comic does stay in sort of PG-13 territory, it also spikes into like R-rated or X-rated stuff. Even if things are censored, you don't really see bits and pieces, you know what I'm saying? So tonally, while it's not as inconsistent as other webcomics that I've read, like Bittersweet Candy Bowl, it still has those spikes in it. I still really do love Better Days. While I can't really relate to the whole being embarrassed by your older work, like I'm always proud of everything that I put out. Even if I'm like, okay, there are issues with it, I'm still proud of the work I've done. I know many artists are like, oh, I can't look at my old stuff, it's so embarrassing. But every stepping stone is a stepping stone to something better. You don't necessarily have to like be over the moon about every single one of them. You should be proud of how far you've come and not try to shy away. Now, like I said, maybe some stuff like the incest stuff is something you really don't want to put in there. But with Fisk being a Gary Stu, he really does just have everyone fall in love with them. Not necessarily always. Like there is that one girl at the beginning that he doesn't get with. He's always so cool and suave. It's very strange. It almost feels like Fisk is some sort of self-insert. Fisk just becomes like a super spy, like a James Bond, or like a modern James Bond. I guess James Bond is still modern. He like is super great at being in the military. Then he gets this super lofty job where he can become this spy, and he makes all this money, and he's super rich, and he has this really cute mouse wife that he was forbidden to see, because when he gets married to Elizabeth, it's kind of at the disagreement of her parents. It's one of those forging your own path kind of things where Elizabeth's parents want her to get married to a Jewish boy because that's just kind of like, you got to do that, you know, you got to marry within the religion. But she doesn't want to do that. She wants to get with Fisk, who I don't really know Fisk's really. I think he's like kind of Catholic or maybe Christian. I don't know. The other issue that I think a lot of people have with this is the way that certain animal species are portrayed. Now, the two biggest notable ones that people always circle back to are that the hyenas are black and the mice are Jewish. This, at least from my perspective, was never portrayed in a sort of negative way. However, the issue is that there really don't seem to be any other parallels with species and our real life. Tommy is Catholic, but his priest is not a rabbit, and Tommy's a rabbit. So it's like, why those specific species being related to those real life equivalents? Maybe there's more that I just haven't figured out yet, or no one's brought up, but it really does seem a little suspicious. On the note of that, like maybe he's kind of embarrassed about how serious the comic got. Of course, with Nikki, she was being sexually abused by her father, who was also like on the FBI's most wanted list, and somehow they didn't find him. Like he's just living out in suburbia and has all these kids, and they like didn't know where he was. It's a little weird how they don't figure it out until Nikki starts having her little rendezvous with Fisk, which also goes back to the whole thing of Fisk is a Gary Stu and everyone loves him. And even though bad things happen to Fisk, it's never really his fault. It's someone else's fault constantly. But I mean, Nikki grows up to be an upstanding citizen. I mean, she is a victim of her circumstances. She gets put into a loving foster home and grows up to be a field medic in the military. And that's also something else I really like about this comic. Something that is a good takeaway from it, that shouldn't be looked on as an embarrassment is the way that the comic circles back around to other characters that you completely forgot about. I really liked Nikki's character arc, and honestly, Jay Naylor didn't have to come back around to that, but he did, and maybe he did it out of some sort of regret for the way that things ended with that. I mean, Nikki doesn't really even seem to be all that bothered by the fact that her dad is dead and she's going into a foster home. She's just like, good. I mean, I'm not saying that her father was a good person or he didn't deserve it, but just the sort of non-reaction almost to it, just like, okay, whatever, it's another Tuesday. And then hearing about how things were with her later as she learned how to adjust to being in a normal family, I don't know. That could be like one of the, I guess, embarrassing parts of like the storytelling itself, but it's also one of those things where the subject matter gets very serious and an otherwise kind of lighthearted comic. I think one of the other issues too is that the comic does spend some time, okay, any time is too much time, but it spends time kind of sexualizing underage characters a little bit. There's a lot of butt shots in this comic, and especially once the characters graduate from high school, things really start to get a little bit crazy in the butt shot and like the maturity and the subject matter department. And for that matter, I think one of the other issues with the storytelling you shouldn't necessarily be embarrassed by, but it is something to learn from, is the way time progresses. Sometimes there will be time jumps and it will be hard to tell at what point in the timeline things are, because they graduate high school and you don't even realize they graduated because they kind of have like one panel about it. Like it's implied like, oh, Lucy's in college now. And it's like, okay, well, what about graduation? Like it does feel like there are major points of their life that are missed. And so it leads to some confusion about where exactly everybody is in their timeline. Because even after they graduate, I mean, it goes from like the 80s to the 90s, because the comic starts in like the early to mid 80s, somewhere in that area down in Georgia. And then it ends somewhere in the mid to late 90s about. I mean, you can kind of tell where things are. Fisk is like out fighting in like 1991. So he's clearly an adult there. So he'd have to be like a kid in the 80s or something like that. But some of these things that are issues with the comic aren't really things to be embarrassed by. They're just minor things that could be fixed, mainly tonal issues, mainly the passage of time, which is kind of hard to tell, especially because there's like no dates thrown around for anything. Things just kind of happen. But as far as like the way the story flows, I feel like the story flow is really good. Nothing feels too disruptive. It all kind of makes sense. And even though there are time jumps that aren't explained, you can kind of quickly get your bearings. But I do wish that I understood where things were a little bit more. Maybe it made more sense on the website initially, but since the only way to read Better Days is to download it off of Jay Naylor's Patreon, it's kind of hard to tell. Because I know everything was sectioned off in the chapters, and now it's just like one massive file with 600 something images in it. And they're .gif images, so my editing program does not like them, and I have to keep converting them to PNGs, which is gonna make editing this video a nightmare. But still, is Better Days overall embarrassing? I'm gonna go with no, but there are elements of it that are not great and are also things that get fixed later on. Like the incest plotline kind of just drops. Like there's no finale for it. Jay Naylor just kind of stops bringing it up. So yeah, I don't think he should be embarrassed by it. I think he should be like, this was made at a certain point in my life where I didn't take these things with the weight that they should be, and I was a little bit more loosey-goosey and wild. It is interesting to see as artists, not just like webcomic artists, but like artists in general, how their tastes and writing styles and like subjects they want to tackle change. Like it seems when artists are younger, they're more willing to go into these risque areas, but as they get older, they start to like mellow out. Not that they're hitting more mature subject matter, but they don't want to take all those risks. And it could possibly be because they have a bigger audience now and they don't want to risk alienating anyone or causing a fuss. But it's something I see often enough for me to kind of wonder why that happens. Is it a maturity in our brains? As our brains develop and they kind of get to where they're going to be for the rest of their lives? Is that what causes us to be like, maybe those things I found interesting when I was younger probably aren't the best things to talk about, like the incest plot. I mean, unless you're George R.R. Martin or Miyazaki, you probably shouldn't write about that kind of thing. On the whole, I think Better Days is good. I think it is a net positive with many areas and things to learn from and places to grow from. And I think Original Life definitely took those lessons and ran with it. It's just really confusing why he would find Original Life embarrassing, but it could possibly be because it's so tied to Better Days, because it is a direct sequel. I'm done rambling about this. What do you guys think? Do you guys think like it's overall a net negative or embarrassing, or he should be ashamed of it? Or do you think that he should be proud of what he's done, but understand that there are things that he probably shouldn't go ahead and tackle again in the future, or things that he can just learn and grow from? I'm in the camp that it is overall good. If you're 18 or older, I would recommend reading Better Days, because it does have a lot of really intensive moments in it. I mean, it's been a while since I've just sat down and reread through the entire thing. I mean, when you're making the structured scripted videos, you only go to specific points, but just sitting down and rereading it as a whole, it really does have a lot of emotional highs, and it grips you and it doesn't let go, and it pulls you along till the very end. It kind of makes me want to reread Original Life too, which isn't quite as long as Better Days, but it's still decently long. Okay, guys. That's it for this video. I will see you next time on the Better Days channel when we talk about what it means to cheat on your spouse.